Thank you so much for checking out our severely simple and severely budget build. I'm going to try and compress the last 10 months of activity into a quick 10-minute video where we talk about why and really break down the costs so far to get to dry end. Please consider subscribing. I promise not to overpost or bore you with useless gratuitous content. So why are we building a low budget house? A few reasons actually. Number one, it allows us to be debt free sooner. We didn't have to take a construction loan to build this house. Two, taxes and insurance are lower on a low budget house. Matter of fact, taxes can be as much as 50% less on a low budget home than on a custom home. Number three, it allows more money to buy a larger size lot. In this case, we were able to buy some acreage by the lake. So how do you build a low budget house? Well, it's really simple. Use as few corners as possible. We have 4. As close to a square as possible, as a square uses the least amount of wall material for the same amount of square footage. Try to use nothing fake like fake dormers or fake columns and so on. Try to use inexpensive materials where possible, and use a simple roof design. This is a big one. And finally, do as much of the work yourself as possible. Labor is by far the most expensive component in a house build, and as the more labor you can do yourself, the more you'll save. The most important aspect of a low budget house is planning, in my opinion. I read a book that said you should spend about 80% of your time planning and 20% in construction. I read another book that said if you have 3,000 hours to build a house, you should spend about 2,900 in planning and design and only 100 in construction. Of course, this is an exaggeration, but it just shows you just how important planning is. In my case, for more than a year now, planning and design have been like a second job for me. Literally every evening, either on YouTube or on Reddit or on Country Plans or on archive.org, just reading something or looking at plans, trying to find a way or trying to figure out how we're going to do every aspect of the build. And even then, if I could have double the time I spend planning, I would gladly take it. Honestly, planning is really the most important thing. The most useful planning tool by far for me was SketchUp. SketchUp is free, easy to learn, and there are many tutorials available online. I found that if it was difficult to create in SketchUp, it would more than likely be really difficult to create or construct in real life. And if it was really easy to do in SketchUp, it would equally be easy to construct in real life. I created and edited the floor plan all in SketchUp. I was also able to create the framing plan, and SketchUp has a really nice feature where it shows you how many studs you need to order. It can calculate how many sheets of plywood you need, and so on. So this minimizes waste overall. Laying out the floor joists in SketchUp provides a very easy and quick visual on where there might be interference. The biggest example, or the best example I can give, is where you might place a toilet over a floor joist. You can see this easily in SketchUp and move the toilet a few inches to one side to avoid this interference. To build a very simple, low-budget house, one has to be really intentional about the design choices. It's almost impossible for somebody to build the Taj Mahal on a low budget. It's too intricate, too complex. But almost anybody can build a shed. In reality, our house is one big shed. Really easy to frame. We made it as simple as possible and to use as much unskilled labor as possible. The guy who helped me had never framed before in his life, but he looked at the plans and he got it. As Frank Lloyd Wright famously said, to build a house at a budget, you have to use as much unskilled labor as possible. That starts with designing a very, very, very simple plan. That's the key. A non-negotiable for us was to have south-facing windows, and many of them. The best houses we looked at all had plenty of windows, and of course the most efficient way to do that in our climate is to face them south, because the sun is really high in the summer, and so you don't have a lot of heat gain in the summer, but in the winter the sun is low in the sky, and so you've got plenty of light streaming in, plenty of heat streaming in, and so on a 30-degree day the house could get to above 80 degrees. Thankfully we have 14 windows in the living area that we can open if it starts to overheat. Windows were one area where we really had to be intentional about the design and planning. Ideally, I wanted very large windows, about 16-foot span, but that span would have required engineering and more structure. Not to mention the fact that they would have cost about 10 times more than what we ended up spending on windows. By designing the windows to be less than 36 square feet and to be mostly 3 feet wide, which is not a custom size, it's an off-the-shelf size, we were able to order directly off the shelf. So even though there was a shortage of windows and people were waiting 8 months for windows, I got all my windows in 4 or 5 weeks, and they were extremely inexpensive. Additionally, if one breaks, it costs very little to replace, versus if you break a large window, you're looking at tens of thousands of dollars and a very long wait to replace that window. Siding is one area where I wish I could get a do-over. I've worked with wood in the past, and I've also done metal working, and woodworking has always been easier for me. So I thought that if I used cedar instead of corrugated steel, that I would be saving money. That was a big mistake. Cedar was impossibly time-consuming to get on and quite expensive. I spent a day and a half planing the fence pickets to be fairly smooth, and then we spent several days painting the boards. With corrugated steel, the boards already come pre-painted. They come to the exact size, and there's very little work involved. I would have saved about $5,000 here if I had used corrugated steel, so that was a rookie mistake. Next time, we'll be using steel. So there it is, the grand total, less than $100,000 to dry in a 3,100 square foot house. Stay tuned for more, and thanks for watching.